Hello, my name is Helene Herman, and we're going to discuss the history of the Jews of Spain, a remarkable story that begins in the remote past and continues today. I first became interested, being 100% Ashkenazi, 50% of that Ukrainian. I became interested when I had a rabbi who had Spanish origins, and her family had moved to Amsterdam. And then I traveled to Morocco, which is very tied into the story we're going to hear today, and finally went to Spain and came back to Spain to pursue my interest in this incredible story, where a country where for more than 1,000 years, the Sepharad, that's the Hebrew word for Spain, was the home to a large Jewish community noted for its richness and its virtuosity, once one of the largest and most prosperous Jewish communities in the world. It was vital and creative and produced doctors, of course, poets, philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists, diplomats, prime ministers, and even military leaders. This was a vital and creative community, as I said, in what is called the Golden Age. Jews coexisted with Muslims and Christians, living together in La Convivencia, an integration unknown elsewhere in the medieval world. And our journey is going to cover the Jews of Spain from ancient times to the present day, including many cities familiar to you or you may have even visited. So the beginnings of Jewish life in Spain are cloaked in myth and legend, and according to medieval Sephardic tradition, the Jews reached the Iberian Peninsula in biblical times, and that's actually not far-fetched. In the Bible, in the book of Obadiah, it says the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad will inherit the cities of the Negev. Sepharad is identified as what we know as Spain today as early as the 1st century of the Common Era, but that may have been due to Jews settling there who adopted a biblical name. Some biblical scholars have actually identified Tarshish, the city where Jonah traveled, as the ancient Spanish city of Tartessus. But in reality, Jews were free to travel and an integral part of ancient life. The earliest Iberian Jews may have come around 1200 BCE with Phoenician coastal colonization, coming from the Middle East in an area today known as Lebanon. And they established a network of trading ports throughout the coast of the Mediterranean. In 970 BCE, King Solomon formed an alliance with the king of the Phoenicians to provide him with sailors. Later, the Carthaginians took over, ruling much of North Africa and southern Spain. And after the destruction of the first temple, 586 BCE, Jewish merchants may have found themselves settling in the Iberian Peninsula. This photo shows the ruins of the Temple of Augustus in Barcelona in the Gothic area, not far from what became the Jewish quarter. And this dates back to the 1st century BCE. The Jewish diaspora, after the destruction of the first temple, migrated to Rome and its territories, including what is known in Latin as Hispania, and that occurred between the 4th and the 1st centuries, again, BCE. And by the 1st century, Jews were a significant part of the Roman Empire's population. It's estimated that up to 10% of the population of the city of Rome itself were Jews. As Roman citizens, Jews in Spain engaged in a variety of occupations, including agriculture, which is still very important in Spain today. Now, in spite of the high level of tolerance and even acceptance, the Romans were still suspicious of Jews and a different worldview, one that influenced Jewish political views as well as spiritual practices. And when the emperor was declared to be divine, we had only one God. We did not worship the emperor. So Jews started having issues with Rome instituting laws limiting where Jews could travel or proselytize. Now, proselytization was quite common by Jews, as demonstrated by the numerous historical edicts against it. So Rome initially accepted Judaism as a legal religion, but the issues became increasingly political more than religious. And after the Judean revolts in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era and the destruction of the Second Temple and the subsequent diaspora of Jews, you saw Jews being sold as slaves or exiled to places like Morocco, or sent as captives. And then other Jews, they scrambled to get out of Judea, and they joined the existing diaspora after the destruction of the Second Temple throughout the Roman Empire, including what became Spain. Now, the earliest records of Jews in Roman Spain actually come from St. Paul in his letter to the Romans. It was his intention to go to Spain to minister the gospel, as Paul concentrated on converting Jews and going to Jewish communities. You also had references in the Talmud coming out of Babylonia to Hispania, kind of close to Hispania. And there was an implication that the Jewish community already established in Spain was communicating with the Jewish community in the Middle East, in both Damascus and in Babylonia. So most of the early records of the existence of Jews in the Iberian Peninsula, and specifically in Spain, come from Christians. In the 1st to the 5th centuries, conversion to monotheism was quite widespread, which set the stage for Christian proselytizing. One of the first records we have of dealing with Jews between Christians was in 306 in the Synod of Elvira. And what you see here is a picture of the synod and also of the Gate of Elvira in Spain, in the area known as Granada. Now, Jews were a substantial and an influential presence in Spain, where rabbis were held in very high esteem. It seems that Jews were of greater concern to Catholic authorities as Catholicism was growing in Spain. It was of greater concern than pagans. So the decrees that the Council of Elvira had, it really pertained to separating the two communities, insulating Christians from Jewish influence, prohibiting marriage with Jews. Any Christian who committed adultery with a Jew would be ostracized. You couldn't eat with a Jew. You could not, it forbade Christians from observing Shabbat, which I found interesting. And finally, it forbade Jews from blessing Christian crops. This was just words, because Jews were very prominent and increasingly prosperous in Spain. But then after the conversion of Emperor Constantine in the 5th century and the adoption of Christianity as the official state religion of Rome, of the Roman Empire, the attacks were no longer solely verbal. Jews became viewed as pariahs and demons, and the assault became physical on both people and property. Then you had the invasion of a German tribe that came in. They invaded the Iberian Peninsula as well as southern France, and they were initially very tolerant Christians. They were a Christian sect following the bishop Arius. They didn't believe in the Trinity. They believed in Jesus, but they didn't believe, and that he was the Son of God, but they did not believe in his divinity. That changed at the end of the 6th century. King Recared, shown here, king of the Visigoths, with their capital in Toledo, which we'll visit later on. Well, he converted to Catholicism, and then he became a fanatical anti-Semite. And they started having meetings, church meetings in Toledo with the king, forcibly baptizing children of mixed marriages, forbidding Jews from holding public office. It seems increasingly they had rules against having intercourse, interfaith intercourse, wasn't just marriage. And then you had the first expulsion. It wasn't 1492. The very first expulsion happened in 613. And you had a number of Jews leaving, and about 90,000 converting. Now, Most of these converts or new Christians maintained their Jewish identities in secret. Crypto Jews go back to the 7th century, and it was an issue. Another meeting, the Fourth Council of Toledo, they started addressing this issue of secret Judaism. So if discovered, the children of a new Christian, if they were discovered practicing Judaism, the children were taken away, sent to monasteries, or to be raised in Christian households. King Ricarod wanted to make sure that his edicts held, so he excommunicated in advance any of his successors who might try to protect the Jews, because increasingly you had nobles and many members of the clergy who went to protect the Jews. It kept getting worse. In the 8th Council of Toledo, all Jewish rites were forbidden. Circumcision, observing the Sabbath, the kosher laws, everything was forbidden. And this was a pretty evil one. A new Christian, a convert, had to promise that if he found any fellow Christian who really relapsed to Judaism, he would kill them by either burning or stoning. Lack of compliance was widespread, so there was a crackdown. So they started to not just seize the property of Jews, they started to seize the property of any nobles or clergy who helped Jews. They were faced with excommunication, which was pretty serious to a practicing Catholic. Still unsuccessful. Know what they had, and they did a lot of things that were physical, including scalping, amputation, in addition to forced baptism, taking children away from their parents, tremendous economic hardships. Jewish agricultural activity came to an end. Jews really couldn't engage in commerce with Christians, not just in Spain, but anywhere. Finally, in 694, conspiracy theory wasn't true. The Visigoths were told that the Jews were plotting with the Muslims of North Africa to turn over their kingdom to the Muslims. So the Jews were decreed to be traitors, and they were enslaved. And 711, with the victory of Tariq ibn Zayed in 711, the lives of Spanish Jews changed dramatically. According to both Catholic and Muslim sources, Jews aided the speed of conquest. It may have not helped, but they were happy at the results. Unfortunately, this was viewed by the Catholics as yet another Jewish betrayal like that of Jesus. What did happen, though, is it was a standard Muslim tactic when they were reclaiming a town, to push ahead to the next town or city, leaving non-Muslims behind to defend. So the Jews did stay behind, and in the defense of Cordoba, it was left in Jewish hands. In Granada, Malaga, Seville, and Toledo, it was left to a mixed army of Jews and North African Muslims, commonly called Moors. Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain or Andalusia, became a very important center of Judaism, and also the home to some of the most important Jewish scholars in history. So the roots of this coexistence, La Convivencia, and this diversity, this what became known as the ornament of the world. Jews and Christians under Muslim law were protected as dhimmi. They might be considered inferior to Muslims, but they did recognize the children of the House of the Covenant, Adal al-Had. They paid taxes to the Muslims, but they were allowed to worship freely. And between 711, with the first Muslim invasion, there were around 1,100. Muslims were very open to working with these talented monotheistic people, particularly Jews. The continued existence of other monotheistic faiths is justified in this verse of the Quran. Say, O believers, I shall not worship what you worship. You do not worship what I worship. I am not a worshiper of what you have worshiped, and you are not worshiping what I have worshipped, to you your religion, to me my religion. Most Muslims, however, didn't really trust the Christians because they felt that their loyalty was to the Catholic kingdoms of the north. So Jews were left in charge of many administrative tasks. It was very interesting how Muslims increasingly relied on the economic and administrative talents and services of Jews much more than Muhammad had ever anticipated or intended. The ornament of the world, Cordoba. Cordoba, beautiful, beautiful city. So in Cordoba, you had a emir, king, who had fled from Damascus because his entire family had been assassinated by a rival clan. And he was an Umayyad, the last Umayyad, and he created the Emirate of Cordoba in Spain. By 926, it had become the Caliphate. This area had a large amount of Jewish activity in various professions, including medicine, science, commerce, finance, and agriculture. The Caliphate was the political and religious center of Muslim Spain, the capital of Muslim Spain. And Cordoba became one of the largest economic and cultural centers in the whole Western world. And as a Muslim intellectual and economic center, it soon rivaled Damascus and Baghdad in the Middle East. Now, if any of you have ever been to Gibraltar, you really can see Morocco right across the 8 miles separating the two. It's only 8 miles to get to Spain from North Africa. So Muslim Spain was holding great promise for Jewish settlement, attracting scholars and poets. And soon the Spanish Jewish community was joined by Jews from Muslim lands, from Morocco to Babylonia, and from Christian Europe to the north, including the kingdoms to the north and Spain, as well as coming from France and even as far away as Germany. You also saw a very increased interest in Hebrew as a language and biblical studies. Now, Arabic was the main language of the Sephardics, the Spanish Jews, in science, philosophy, and everyday business. But language and poetry soon flourished among both Jews and Muslims. And in Muslims, they praise poetry. They love the language. It's considered a holy language. Arabic is what the Quran is written in. And they also wrote poetry, very, very big in the Muslim community in Spain and in Morocco. So soon both Jews and Muslims, accomplished in both Hebrew and Arabic, focused on the glory of both languages. Paper making spread very widely in the Mediterranean. It was actually brought by Muslim merchants on the Silk Road from China. A love of books went hand in hand with a love of the written word. While in the cathedral libraries of the north, you may have up to 100 manuscripts, in the library of Cordoba, you had over 400 manuscripts. Muslim architecture flourished. It was quite extraordinary, and it had influence even after the reconquest of Spain by the Christian north. What you see here is the Cathedral of Cordoba. It originally started out as a small Roman temple, then it became a Visigoth church, then it became the Great Mosque of Cordoba, which you see these beautiful arches. It was conquered by Ferdinand III in 1235 and became a Christian cathedral. Fortunately, they kept the architecture. This cathedral, by the way, is very, very large, just slightly smaller than St. Peter's in Rome. In Cordoba today, as in Jewish quarters throughout Spain, you see this stylized symbol of the Sepharad, placed to commemorate the road of the Sepharad, the road of the Spanish Jews. And we'll see more of it as we continue on our journey. So Cordoba played a pivotal role in the history of Jewish life. In the Middle Ages, with exceptional prosperity under the Caliphate of Cordoba, a seat of Jewish learning, scholarship, and culture, gradually eclipsing the Babylonian Talmudic academies, and Jews thriving in a number of areas. Now, what's important to note is that Hebrew, with the diaspora and the scattering of Jews, Hebrew had not been a spoken language for centuries. And what you saw in Al-Andalus, and particularly in the Caliphate of Cordoba, you saw a rebirth of Hebrew in poetry and literature. Hebrew was no longer just a traditional and liturgical language. It wasn't just the language of the Torah and the Talmud. It became a living language used to describe everyday life. And Cordoba became a mecca for Jewish scholars, and you saw a growth, a burgeoning of Hebrew literature. Now, one of the important figures in this history was the royal Jewish doctor, who's also a diplomat and a scholar, Hasdai ibn Shaprut. The word ibn means son of, just like Ben in Hebrew means son. He was very much focused in on language, among other things that he did. And he sponsored a very important grammarian named Menachem ben Saruk, who wrote the very first dictionary of biblical Hebrew and Aramaic. Hasdai was not satisfied with looking eastward for halachic guidance from Babylonia and Damascus, and he established a very important Talmudic academy right in Cordoba. So Spain started becoming a new center of Jewish study, again, attracting gifted scholars and poets from all over. Jews became very, very active in translating Greek texts into Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin. And this was important because through these translations, Jews were actually instrumental in bringing science and philosophy to the rest of Europe, and knowledge that later formed much of the basis for Renaissance learning. Here we have Cordoba's Jewish quarter and Cordoba's synagogue. So today you can visit the Jewish quarter, again, home to the synagogue and a newly expanded and fairly large Jewish cultural center. And again, everywhere you see the Sepharad, and you also see blue and white tiles with the word Ha all over. Now, this synagogue is one of 3 of the best preserved medieval Spanish synagogues, and it's the heart of the Jewish quarter. It was built in around 1315 and was actually used until 1492. And what you see, as you see in many of the old Spanish synagogues, you see beautiful decorative plaster work inspired by mosques. Both mosques and synagogues tend to be very plain on the outside. The glory was served the inside. After 1492 and the expulsion, it was used as a hospital, a monastery, and finally a school. And then at the end of the 19th century, the king of a reunified Spain declared it a national monument. Somebody asked me if I went to Spain on a Jewish tour, and I said, no need. Everywhere you go in Spain, you see remnants of the Jewish history and the Sepharad. The Spanish are not proud of a history of persecution against the Jews, not proud particularly of what happened in 1492. Reference it quite often, and everywhere we see that symbol of the Sepharad. In 1319, I'm sorry, not 1319, in 1013, a fundamentalist group of Berbers lay siege to Cordoba, and the caliphate ended. Berbers are the Aboriginal original tribe and inhabitants of North Africa, and many of them converted to Islam, and they were very warlike people. So the first group came to Cordoba, and the caliphate ended. And what you started seeing increasing groups of Muslim Moroccan Berber tribes and warriors coming from Morocco and North Africa. And then you had the Christian kingdoms coming from the north. So things started to change after the fall of a caliphate. In 1085, Toledo fell. We'll visit Toledo in a little while. And the Muslim prince of Seville got very nervous, and he invited a Berber tribe called the Almoravides to come. Was not a good idea. During their after they came, a very important Jewish scholar, Maimonides, Moses ben Maimon, Moshe ben Maimon, a philosopher, very influential Torah. He was born under the rule of the Almoravides, and that wasn't terrible. But fanatical Almohads came next, and they were anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, anti-anything, ignorant fundamentalists. They treated the dhimmis, the protected people, very harshly. In fact, they rescinded the laws of dhimmi, and Jews and Christians were expelled, faced with conversion, forced conversion to Islam or death. Many Jews fled or became crypto-Jews. Instead of converting to Catholicism and practicing Judaism in secret, they converted to Islam and practiced Judaism in secret. But a number, like the family of Maimonides, fled south and eastward to more tolerant Muslim lands like Egypt, which is where Maimonides' family finally ended up, and others to the growing Christian kingdoms of the north. And as stated before, Cordoba was reconquered by the Christians. Things changed. What you see here is a street in the Jewish quarter that leads up to the synagogue we just saw, and the statue of Maimonides. Now, I was on a tour which had 22 people on it, Jewish, including myself. But we stopped at the statue of Maimonides. It was pointed out by the guides, and every tour guide that comes to Cordoba comes to see this wonderful statue, and they are proud of the son of Spain. They are proud of Maimonides. We also see this beautiful plaque commemorating the 850th anniversary of his birth. So what happened after the fall of the caliphate? I'll get to that in a minute. As far as the Golden Age, it depends on the historian that you talk to. Depends on in the research I've done, some say it ended with the fall of the caliphate. Others say in 1066 with a massacre of Granada, which we'll get to. Others say when the Almoravides came in, or when the very fierce Almohads came in. What happened? Okay, those of you who remember world history and the fall of the Roman Empire and the dissolution of Europe into these small city-states, medieval kingdoms, after the fall of the caliphate and the Berber invasion, Muslim Spain was divided into smaller city-states called taifas. But even as these taifas fell to a reconquest by the northern Catholics, Jews continued in high places, in spite of and in contradiction to anti-Semitism. The disintegration of the caliphate actually expanded opportunities as the fundamentalist Almoravides, who were the fundamentalist groups, were more moderate, and the reconquering Catholic kings from the north, they all came to appreciate and use Jewish skills and Jewish tax money. And Jewish scientists and physicians and merchants, poets and scholars were generally very much valued by both Muslim and Christian leaders, particularly the linguistic skills. That was very important. Now, some of the taifas, like Granada, they tried to emulate Cordoba, which was called, by the way, ornament of the world by many writers. And many Muslim leaders actually appointed Jewish advisors. One of the things to remember is that the Arabic was considered a holy language. The Berbers didn't speak or write it. And they increasingly relied on Jews as translators and diplomats, etc. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at several medieval Spanish kingdoms in what was in Al-Andalus, in what was formerly the Caliphate, visiting the remains of Jewish quarters and learning about some Jewish scholars and leaders, including one who served as the general of a Muslim army for 17 years. Granada. The Jewish community of Granada was one so large and so important that it was called Granada, Kingdom of the Jews, or Granada of the Jews. Jews really did prosper there. Again, science, commerce, industry, and the cotton and silk industry, both manufacturing and trading. Before there was the schmatzer business in New York City, the Jews of Spain and Granada and other areas were very much involved in making fabric, specifically cotton and silk. Well, you see here the statue in Granada. It's not in the Jewish quarter. He's a son of Granada. His name is Yehuda ibn Tibbon. He was a translator and a physician, born in Granada in 1120 and known as the father of the translators. He actually left Spain, went north to France around 1150 for the same reason that Maimonides' family left Cordoba, fleeing the Almohad extremists. Now his son Samuel, very important, was responsible for translating Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, a very seminal work by Maimonides, and he translated it from Arabic to Hebrew. As I said before, the Sepharad, the Sephardic Jews in Spain, their prime language was Arabic. Now, of course, I can't discuss Granada without talking about the Alhambra Palace. One of the reasons I returned to Spain, I fell in love with the concept of the Alhambra after reading Washington Irving when I was in 5th grade. Now, the palace that became the Alhambra was largely ignored until the 11th century. But before you get to the Alhambra, on your way there, was an important Jewish settlement. And the vizier, the prime minister to the Berber ruler of Granada, the Emirate, he wanted to preserve this area. So it was he who renovated and built the palace there for his king. And there it stands in its magnificent glory. Samuel HaNagid, or Shmuel HaNagid, was born in 993, Talmudic scholar, grammarian. They were all obsessed with grammar, a soldier, a merchant, politician, poet. If you were a Sephardic gentleman or an Arabic Muslim gentleman, you wrote poetry. And he wrote in Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic. He wrote poetry in a new style that really he took aspects of Arabic poetry and applied it to biblical Hebrew. He actually was born in Cordoba, and he fled from Berbers to Malaga, which is in the Emirate of Granada. And he rose there in position, finally became an assistant vizier, prime minister to the Berber king Habus, who gave him the title Nagid, which means prince. When Habus died, Samuel HaNagid made certain that the first son, who was not particularly pro-Jewish, there was a lot of envy about the Jews, made sure he did not succeed the father. He made certain that the younger son, who was very pro-Jewish, succeeded the father. And in return, the Emir Badis made Samuel HaNagid the prime minister, highest ranking Jewish courtier in Spain. He stayed in this position for 3 decades, including 17 years commanding a Muslim army. He asserted, like many of the other Jewish scholars in what was formerly Al-Andalus, formerly the Emirate, asserted his independence from the Babylonian academies. In the North, you didn't have that. He started writing independently on Jewish law for the Spanish community, promoted Jewish welfare, bought many copies of the Talmud, gave scholarships to promote Talmudic study, founded a very important yeshiva where none other than Maimon ben Joseph, the father of Maimonides, studied. He died in 1056 of natural causes. Beloved and mourned by the entire community, Muslims and Jews alike. Succeeded by his son Yosef, who wasn't wasn't his father, wasn't very strong. It was a lot of envy by the masses. And in 1066, you had the unfortunate Massacre of Granada, where an envious Muslim mob stormed the palace and crucified Joseph. Huge massacre, 4,000 killed in just one day. And the situation kept deteriorating and really got bad after 1148, when you had the invasion of the fanatical fundamentalist Almohads. Now, their rule it caused many Jewish scholars to leave, but also Muslim scholars left Muslim-controlled portions of Spain. They went to Toledo, controlled by the Christians, reconquered in 1085. But before we get to Toledo, we have two other stops along the way. Malaga. Beautiful Malaga. Malaga is very old. Malaga was actually founded by the Phoenician sailors over 3,000 years ago. Maybe had some Jews along with them then. And they gave it its name, Malaga, which means salting, because the harbor was used for salting fish. When the Romans conquered the Mediterranean, you had Roman rule with many Jewish merchants living in Malaga, and they were trading with North African port cities. After 711 and the fall of most of the Iberian Peninsula, Al-Andalus, to the Muslims, it became a very important port, with Jews settling as merchants and traders working throughout the Mediterranean. With the Berber invasion starting in 1013, many of Cordoba's Jewish community fled to Malaga. What you see here is a monument to a very important poet and philosopher. His name was Solomon ibn Gabirol, and he was born in Malaga around 1021. A prolific writer in Arabic, Hebrew, and also in Latin. He wrote a very important work in Latin called the Fons Vitae, a philosophical dialogue that was favored much by St. Thomas Aquinas and Franciscan monks. Medieval translators had Latinized his Ibn Gabirol. Avensibrol was one of the names they gave him. And it was thought until the 19th century, it was thought that this very important philosophical work was either written by a Christian or a Muslim. And then they found out it was actually a Jew. Ibn Gabirol was brilliant. At 17, he composed 5 of his best-known poems, one enumerating all of the 613 mitzvot that Jews are supposed to follow. And at 19, he composed a 400-verse alphabetical and acrostic poem, like a puzzle, teaching the rules of Hebrew grammar. For those of you who know Hebrew and read the Ashrei, also a alphabetical poem, think of the challenges of doing a poem like this at 400 verses. Now, those who do go to synagogue, he wrote Adon Olam. Adon Olam. For those of us who go Friday night and Saturday morning, Shabbat services, we sing a beautiful song that was written by a Spanish poet. So what happened to Malaga? Well, the last bastion of Spanish rule was Muslim rule, to be conquered by the Spanish, specifically on January 2nd, 1492, Granada was a holdout. Now, with the conquest of Granada by Isabel and Ferdinand, Muslims were allowed to stay, but the Jews of Malaga were enslaved and sold in the slave markets of the Mediterranean. Today, there's a small but important Jewish population that was actually revived by Sephardic Jews coming from North Africa. And what you have being built there now, it actually was built there, is a Sephardic Museum of Malaga, which has a synagogue, a study center, a cultural center. And in Malaga today, you can send your children to Jewish day school and buy meat at a kosher butcher. Seville, flamenco, dancing, bullfights, and yes, Jews. It was a major Jewish community in the Middle Ages, and it may have had Jews settling there as early as the first century, the Common Era. When the Muslims actually came to Seville in 712, the city was put in charge of its numerous Jewish inhabitants, and it was a major community. After the 1066 Granada massacre, many Jews fled there. Many were appointed to state positions, and it rose as a center of Jewish scholarship. Jews lived very peacefully there under the Almoravides, including the royal physician and prime minister. 1148, Seville fell to the anti-Semitic Almohades. It was forced conversion, a wave of crypto-Jews. It was forced conversion there. Again, crypto-Judaism goes way back. Jews still holding on to the faith and practicing in secret. But in the coexistence, in La Convivencia, just as some Muslim rulers supported Jews, so did a few Catholic rulers. And in 1248, Ferdinand III of Castile conquered Seville. And the Jews met him. You see him there in the middle. The Jews met him carrying a Torah with an engraved silver key that said, "God will open and the king will enter." He was very gracious to Jews, giving land to all who had helped him. He took the mosques from the Muslims he had conquered, and he gave them to the Jews to convert to synagogues. And Jews lived very peacefully in a large Jewish quarter. Now, the Jewish quarters in Spain were not ghettos. The Jews chose to live together. I have visited Ferdinand's tomb in the Cathedral of Seville. See a picture on your screen. It's inscribed in 4 languages: Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, and Castilian. In the Middle Ages, you had the development of the vernacular of languages that later became modern Spanish, French, etc. The Romance languages. And by the way, Romance was originally the name of a language, the prototype Romance language, which actually called Romance. After he died, his son also very much favored the Jews and confirmed his father's gifts, and he gave the Jews commercial and industrial privileges. And by the middle of the 14th century, you had about 7,000 Jewish families, and many were involved in the textile trade. Now, 7,000 doesn't seem like a lot of people, but we have to understand this is a medieval population. So in medieval times, 7,000 was a lot of people. Unfortunately, by the middle of the 14th century, starting in 1341, the prosperity of the Jews aroused the envy of the common folk, of the people, and the clergy increasingly, and the nobility. They felt that the Jews were being favored, and you saw issues in spite of many royal decrees against any anti-Semitic acts. So I mentioned Toledo, and here we are, second time there, and it just never fails to disappoint. It started out as a sleepy Roman town. Then, as I mentioned before, the capital of the Visigoth kingdom. Under the Cordoba Caliphate, it became a fortress. They had a fortress there. Then it became an outpost of Christian kingdoms fighting against the Muslims, and finally became the capital of all the Spanish Empire until 1561. Now, the decentralization and reconquest by Christians actually expanded Jewish opportunities. As I said before, the Jews were valued by both Muslims and Christian rulers. And Toledo soon became the most populous and rich. When I say rich, I don't just mean money, but also intellectually rich Jewish community in the Kingdom of Castile. You had a coexistence peacefully with both Muslims and Christians. It became known as the city of the 3 cultures, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived together. After the reconquest in 1085, which I mentioned before, Toledo's Jews were translating Arabic texts to the new Romance languages, including Castilian. And then King Alfonso of Leon, King Alfonso VI, was very, very tolerant towards the Jews. He actually won the praise of Pope Alexander II because he said, good, this will estrange the Jews from the Muslims, drive a wedge. So King Alfonso gave Jews full equality with Catholics and gave them rights to enjoyed by the nobility. Probably eventually not a good idea. But in gratitude, the Jews of Toledo willingly placed themselves in Alfonso's and the country's service, and had a large army of 40, that included 40,000 Jews who were distinguished by their black and yellow turbans. Important battles would never begin until after Shabbat. Now, the king's favoritism was very pronounced and increasing, and it caused issues. And the next pope said, you have to stop letting Jews rule over Catholics. And again, the king's favoritism aroused the hatred and envy of the Catholic majority. So in the late Middle Ages, the Jewish community thrived in Toledo. 5 Talmudic academies and at least 11 synagogues, and 2 remain, although they're not active synagogues anymore. The Samuel Hilleby Synagogue and the Ibn Shoshan Synagogue, only a few blocks apart in the old Jewish quarter. And the style was very much influenced by Muslim architecture with these beautiful arches that you see. Now, in truth, Muslim builders who came borrowed details from Romans, Corinthian capitals, and the columns, and these beautiful horseshoe arches that you see throughout southern Spain in particular. This synagogue was built around 1180, and under Alfonso VIII, Jews enjoyed a lot of the king's favor, as he was in love with a Jewish woman, and this synagogue became the center of Toledo's Jewish life until 1405, when there was a riot and it was converted into a church named Santa Maria la Blanca. The bema, the Torah Ark or Aron, the seats for the congregation, all destroyed, and the building was converted into a church. And all that remains today is the architecture, and on the tops of all of the arches you have Jewish stars throughout. This is not new. This is old. This was originally when it was built. And like synagogues and mosques, simple on the outside, ornamentation is saved for the inside. Now, before I look at Samuel Hilleby Synagogue, let me mention this man. He was working for a very pro-Jewish king, King Pedro I of Castile and Leon. He was a chamberlain, a judge, and importantly, he was the treasurer. Pedro's enemies organized a terrible pogrom. It lasted until 1390. And in that, they got possession of the royal treasures, and Pedro demanded its return, and accompanied by Samuel, reclaimed the treasury and the city of Toledo. The king was very upset. In fact, so upset that he introduced forceful measures against anti-Semitism, including the execution of at least 5 of the anti-Jewish riot leaders. His enemies, they called him Pedro the Cruel, not because he was cruel to the Jews, but they felt he was cruel to Catholics. And they also called him the King of the Jews. So Samuel was highly placed, and he had a palace, which you see here, and right next to it, he founded his own private synagogue. The construction of the synagogue was violently opposed by the church, but King Pedro permitted it. Pope was very upset. Under papal pressure, increased papal pressure, the king finally turned against Samuel, who had served him so well, jailed him, and he died in jail, tortured to death. Pedro was actually an anomaly by this time. By the middle of the 14th century, you saw the end of the coexistence, increased discrimination against Jews, and pogroms. And after the death of Samuel Hilleby, the Jews had to wear a yellow badge, a punishment for having supported him. This yellow badge had already been enacted by the Pope and was the Jews in France and in northern Spain, the Catholic kingdoms, were already wearing it. So this is, see, very simple on the outside. This is the Samuel Hilleby Synagogue, also known as the Synagogue El Transito. It was a synagogue, became a church, and finally it's a Sephardic museum. It was a private synagogue annexed to his palace. It was very high, you could see it from far away. And after the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, it was made into a church renamed El Transito de Nuestra Senora. Basically, it's the Church of the Death of Mary. It became a military barracks for a while. And then 1910, it became a museum. Again, the Spanish, and we'll get to this, tried to reclaim the Jewish heritage of Spain. And so in 1910, it was a museum. And the building's known for its rich decoration, its Muslim style, beautiful women's gallery, and soaring height. Instead of being divided into aisles by rows of arches, it's dominated by an open hall oriented to a triple arched Torah arc. Now, I've seen double arcs in Morocco, but this is the first time I saw a triple one. But again, you see those beautiful stucco decoration that was borrowed from the Muslims. You see that throughout. As I alluded to before, you did have Jews in the north. You did have Jews in the north. So a story is not just about Andalusian Jews. Jews were very important in Catalonia, Barcelona area. That dates back to the 9th century. And the Jews in Catalonia were very influential in the emergence of Barcelona as a significant international port. And again, going all the way back to the Phoenicians, you had Jewish merchants. You had 11th and 12th century, you had Bedin there. Rabbinic court became a teaching center, a link in the chain of transmission of teachings from the Babylonian academies. They still went to the Babylonian academies, and they did have their own academies as well by the 13th century. But in the middle of the 13th century, things started to change in Spain. We'll get to that. Blood libel accusations, Jews started having prohibitions. They couldn't hold public office, and they were forced to debate with Christian clergy on whether Jesus was the Messiah. And one of the most important was in 1263, called the Disputation of Barcelona. It was a Christian scholar against a Jewish scholar, and the Christian scholar was a former Jew who had converted and took it, and he became a fanatical anti-Semitic. His name was Pablo Cristiani, a Dominican priest, and he debated a Jewish philosopher, physician, scholar, Kabbalist named Maimonides. That's his nickname. We'll get to his real name very soon. The question came, who won? Well, actually, the king stopped it. James I, he actually awarded Maimonides, the Jew, 300 gold coins, and even addressed Jews at the synagogue. He said, never before had he heard an unjust cause so nobly defended. And we have to remember that Jews were not only considered private property, they were money makers. They were not saying lenders, they were money makers because they paid taxes in exchange for protection. 1391 saw the end of Barcelona's Jewish community for centuries. The El Cal, that's the name of the beautiful winding streets in the old Gothic area, the old city of Barcelona was attacked. Jews were forced to convert, many others were just killed. But there's still heritage, and we'll talk about Barcelona today at the end of our session. But again, you can wander the streets of the El Cal, and there's signage everywhere. There's tributes to the history of Jews in Spain and Barcelona throughout El Cal, including, and there's a museum dedicated to the history of the Jewish quarter. And you see here Synagoga Major, possibly the oldest synagogue in all of Europe, dating back to the 3rd century, open to the public and housing a 500-year-old Torah, which we'll see later on. Not far from Barcelona is Girona, very strong Jewish community, second largest in the area of Catalonia. Probably heard the term Catalan. The Jewish landowners there not only paid taxes to the king, they also paid a tithe to the church. Girona became the first center of the study of Kabbalah in the Iberian Peninsula, influenced by the mystics of Provençal, headed by Isaac the Blind. Girona's Kabbalists were instrumental in spreading Kabbalah among the general public, and the Zohar was actually written in Spain. Now, the greatest Catalonian scholar and sage, I said, was Maimonides. His actual name was Moshe ben Nachman. He's called the Ramban with an N, a nun, as opposed to Maimonides, whose nickname was the Rambam with an M and a mem at the end. This was a small community, but very important. In the 13th century, it had about 1,000 Jews, including several administrators, to the court of Pedro III of Aragon. Now, when the priests at the local cathedral started a custom of throwing stones on the Jewish quarter from the cathedral tower on Good Friday, causing a lot of damage, the king was incensed, and he threatened to hold the bishop personally responsible and fine him for such actions. But then soon things changed. By the end of the 13th century, Jews could no longer be administrators, could no longer hold land. 1391 saw the beginning of persecutions. You had a few conversos, many chose martyrdom. Some converted, but still, these new Christians continued to practice Judaism in secret, crypto-Jews. Somehow, Girona's synagogue and mikveh survived until the expulsion in 1492, and the Jewish quarter is well preserved. We still have the original streets, buildings, and remnants of a Jewish past, and an active museum of Jewish heritage. Again, throughout Spain, you have these incredible museums. One of the things I saw in the quarter up there is a whole, instead of tacking a mezuzah on the wall outside their home, when they built the home, they carved a hole in the wall to hold the mezuzah. Okay, things started to change, and actually started changing. It started changing with the Crusaders. It started changing with the Crusaders. They came to Toledo in 1212, and what did they do? They started killing the Jews and robbing the Jews, and that was actually stopped by the king. Although the kings of the north, Aragon, Navarre, Castile, and Valencia, for the most part protected Jews, we started seeing increased anti-Jewish actions by the Pope and the clergy following the Pope. By 1250, the Pope Innocent IV said no new synagogues could be built. Lots of papal rules. Jews can't associate with Catholics, live in the same house, use the same bath, etc. And the kings of Spain pushed back. They pushed back. Jews cultivated the economy, commerce, finance. They even were military men. And the monarchs of Spain, of Catholic Spain, felt the Jews were economically useful and loyal. And they also said that the Jews were fairly small, not minuscule, but they felt that the Jews were loyal, politically weak, and wouldn't rise up and would not rebel against them. So the Jews prospered, owning real estate, flourishing in textiles and agriculture. The important thing is follow the money with everything. 35 to 60% of the income of the Spanish monarchs came from Jews. Numbers vary, but it's estimated in Catholic Spain, again, we're not including Granada, by 1300, you had a population of about 500,000 Jews in 120 Jewish communities. The Jews were multilingual and acted as intermediaries. They were central to the scientific learning that led to the age of discovery, Vasco da Gama, Columbus, and more. Unfortunately, their prosperity and the favoritism that the king showed them roused the jealousy of the people and the nobles, and provoked the hatred of the clergy. Meanwhile, the Catholic rulers acted in their own financial interest to try and protect the Jews. In spite of anti-Semitic acts that happened, compared to the rest of Europe, Sepharad, Spain, gave Jews great opportunities. And as these Catholic monarchs exploited Jewish know-how, it attracted settlement by Jews from other parts of the world at that time, the known world. And I said Jews lived almost solely in Jewish quarters, but these were not ghettos. These were not ghettos. So you had a major presence until 1492. I call this the middle of the end. It's the 14th century. Bubonic plague. Of course, the Jews were blamed for causing it, although they died of it. But by 1360, all of Spain, except for Granada, was Catholic. In 1390, you had James II of Aragon, pressured by the church. This is only in Aragon, passing an expulsion edict. And it was not enacted. But before 1492, you had the first expulsion edict. The king and the clergy no longer put up with Jews. Jews had to convert, leave, or risk torture and death. So by 1391, you start this, I consider this the middle of the end. You had the largest conversion of Jews, many pogroms, and look at, see the map of the anti-Jewish riots that happened throughout Spain, except for Granada. You had major Jewish communities destroyed. In Seville, you had 7,000 Jewish families where a mob killed 4,000 in one day, and the rest to live submitted to baptism. Synagogues soon became churches. In Cordoba, 2,000 corpses, Jewish corpses, lay in heaps in the streets, and the violence spread to Toledo and throughout the Sepharad. In Barcelona, 23 synagogues in Barcelona ceased to exist. Fortunately, the Jews of the Sepharad had enough power, wealth, and influence to bribe the king and stop the law until the Alhambra decree in 1492. The church was obsessed with conversos led by a former Jew, nothing worse than a self-hating Jew, the Archbishop of Burgos, Paul of Burgos, who was a former rabbi, Talmudic scholar, and he converted 50 leading Jewish scholars who signed a document saying, it is nonsense to resist Christianity. The only way to survive is to convert. You had Jewish scholars who pushed back. Hilleby Synagogue stands out, and they try to reverse the tide. And one of the things they started doing, which ended up biting them in the leg, they wrote books attacking Christianity. And one book in particular, called, I'll give you the translation, The Shame of the Gentiles, almost stopped conversion by the Jews, but the end result was a wave of anti-Semitism. And saying anything against Christianity, ridiculing it, became a capital crime. The entire Spanish Jewish population was held guilty, and this book justified the harshest persecutions which soon followed. 1412 saw a series of anti-Jewish laws, and basically the Jews could not do business anymore. They couldn't do anything. The only thing they could do is chop wood or draw water. It just was, you started seeing though, after the 1412, you started seeing that you started seeing Jews leaving. They didn't wait. They saw the writing on the wall, just like my family did in Berlin. They saw the writing on the wall. You started having another forced debate, again, conversos, new Christians, against leading Spanish Jews. And the Pope was basically the referee to make it fair. It was a farce. And this was a debacle. It was the beginning of the real end. The Inquisition. Hard for me to say the Inquisition without thinking of the Mel Brooks movie. History of the World, Part 1. But the Inquisition is no joke, and it really wasn't against Jews. It was against heretics, conversos. It was against the new Christians and Protestants and anybody who would consider a heretic. And they tortured people. So everybody started testifying against others, and everybody informed on everybody else. And the cruelty was unspeakable. So after the torture, people were still burnt at the stake. A Christian suspected of being Jewish and being a crypto-Jew was far worse off than an unconverted Jew. And this soon became counterproductive to the conversion process. Many of the potential converts said, I'm not going to convert. The Inquisition might get to me. In the late 1400s, the Inquisition was headed by Tomás de Torquemada. He was a fanatic who held a mystical hold over Isabel and Ferdinand, both fanatical Catholics in their own right, but not as much as Isabella. And Torquemada was a personal confessor who convinced them that it was only by converting all the Jews of Spain would they fulfill the task that God had set before them. Now, what's interesting is that Ferdinand and Isabella, who ruled the Kingdom of Castile and ended up unifying Spain, they had Jews highly placed in their government. I mention one of them. You may be familiar with him, Don Isaac Abarbanel, known as the Abarbanel. He had been born in Portugal originally. He was a noted warrior, a Castilian general, a general in the army, and held a very important position. He was the Minister of Finance. So the 100-year stay on the expulsion decree that had roots in 1391 was officially over. Granada, the last kingdom, fell to Ferdinand and Isabella. As I said before, the Jews there were enslaved. The reconquest was over. Many Jews scrambled. They converted, at least superficially, but it was too late. And in the Alhambra decree in March of 1492, really the force behind this was Isabella, the Jews were expelled. Jews were accused of subverting the Holy Catholic faith. Isabella said they were drawing faithful Christians away from their beliefs. Whether it was by real or perceived proselytization, we don't know. We can understand why Jews don't proselytize or stop proselytizing, because they were so harshly punished for it. The king's Jewish advisors were exempt from the decree, but Abarbanel, he left. But before he left, he tried everything to have the edict of expulsion canceled. And he told King Ferdinand, he said, expulsion is economically and social foolish. And even before what happened later on in 1492, and Columbus and the expansion of the Spanish kingdoms into the New World, even before that, Spain was beginning its struggle for world domination against England. This was the wrong time, said Abarbanel, for upheaval. And the king listened to him, was actually ready to give in when Torquemada rushed in holding a gold crucifix and said, "Will you crucify him a second time for 30 pieces of silver?" Boom, decree was enacted. Abarbanel left. Some of the other Jews in the court took the exemption, but Abarbanel left. So the Jews were given 4 months to convert to Catholicism or leave. And the numbers vary again, but it's estimated that 250,000 Jews left Spain, 1492. The last practicing Jews left on Tisha B'Av in August of 1492. And you had remaining crypto-Jews trying. It's very difficult to serve two masters, but they were fiercely persecuted by the Inquisition and started really disappearing into the Catholic majority. It's not surprising that many historians and social scientists say that almost everyone in Spain has Jewish blood somewhere along the line. I'm not going to go into the details of the diaspora. That could take about, at least 3 sessions, but it really was the end of Spanish Jewry, a blow unequaled until the Holocaust. It's not as large, of course, but it was about 250,000 left. Many others died. Where did they go? Many fled to Portugal, but 5 years later, they were expelled. Many privateers came to rescue them. Now, some pirates did capture and destroy fleeing ships, but you also had privateers, pirates, sent to rescue them and bring them to the Ottoman Empire, financed by Portuguese-born Dona Gracia Mendes Nasi, the Caliph of the Ottoman Empire. Took advantage of the Alhambra decree. He knew how the Jews worked together with the Muslims in Spain. And he not only allowed the Spanish Jews to settle in his wealthiest cities, but he encouraged them. Now, Jerusalem had been decimated during the Crusades, never really regrew. And in 1488, there were only 70 Jewish families in Jerusalem. And by the beginning of the 16th century, in 1500, you had 1,500 Jewish families. You also had a lot of Jews in Turkey itself, with 44 synagogues established. Most of the Jews stayed in the Mediterranean basin. Italy is where Abarbanel ended up. Other Jews went to England, to the Netherlands, and many came to the New World, where unfortunately the Inquisition followed them, but another story for another time. So despite the Inquisition, many of these new Christians continued to secretly and discreetly practice Jewish rituals. The crypto Jews celebrated Purim. In the Fiesta de Santa Esterica, there is no Santa Esterica, that's Saint Esther. That was Purim. The conversos were subject to suspicion. The Inquisition still was going on. 3,000 heretics died between 1570 and 1700, executed. There were cleanliness of blood laws where Jewish converts, the new Christians, could not hold certain offices. But then with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, you saw nobles and scholars in Spain saying this was a mistake. This was a mistake. We want the Jews to come back. Actually started in Madrid. This Count Olivares tried to get the Jews back. But the Inquisition, nope, they remained vigilant. Jews could not come to Spain. The Inquisition, it did not end in Spain until 1834, and no Jew was allowed, practicing Jew was allowed to set foot on Spanish soil until 1858. But they did start to come back. This is a picture here of the synagogue Beth Yaakov in Madrid, established in 1917. You had in the south along the coast, you had Moroccan Jews coming and establishing home-based synagogues there. And then Spanish historians really started to take an interest in the Sephardim, the Jews of Spain, take an interest in Ladino, the Judeo-Spanish dialect, and in the Jews of northern Morocco, where you had Spain sharing the protectorate of Morocco with the French. Then in 1924, you had a dictator take over Spain, Miguel Primo de Rivera, and he wanted the Jews to come back. It was the first attempt to get Jews back. So he gave right of Spanish citizenship to some Sephardic Jews in the Ottoman Empire. It had limitations and officially ended in 1930. But later, it was cleverly used in the 1940s. It was 1944 by a Spanish diplomat in Budapest, the Angel of Budapest, Angel Sambriz, who saved 5,000 Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews from deportation by declaring them to be citizens of neutral Spain. And he hid them from the Nazis in safe houses in Budapest. Another story for another time. Before the Spanish Civil War started in 1936, you had about 7,000 Jews in Spain, mostly in Barcelona and in Madrid. I'm not going to go into all the details of Franco. Generalissimo Francisco Franco, fortunately, is still dead. He sided with Hitler, who helped him in the Spanish Civil War. And when he won the Spanish Civil War in 1939, he made Spain a Catholic state. Jews and Protestants could not worship publicly. He was personally sympathetic to Nazi ideology. He believed in the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy. Spain was neutral in the war, in World War II, but that didn't stop him from compiling a register of Spanish Jews and delivering the list to Himmler. And there were many of the, there were actually concentration camps in Spain. The concentration camps in Spain were actually for any of the rebels, purported communists, but it held a lot of Jews, and some of them ended up being deported to Nazi concentration camps. Despite his aversion to Zionism and the Judeo-Marxist conspiracy, it's not as rabidly, thank goodness, anti-Semitic as Hitler. You did have Jews being smuggled across the northern border with France and then into Portugal and beyond. Now, following the Nazi defeat and the end of World War II, the Spanish government tried to destroy any evidence of cooperation with the Nazis, but documents survived. And in post-war war years, Spain started cultivating this myth that it actually had protected Jews in Europe, but it wasn't true. They were doing it to improve diplomatic relations with the Allies. There's that 500-year-old Torah that got brought back to Barcelona. So after the war, Franco's regime was actually hospitable to many of those responsible for Jewish deportation and extermination, including people from the Vichy government. But by 1947, Jewish life started to resume, and you started getting Jews coming in from North Africa and from other parts of Europe. The Alhambra Decree was finally rescinded, 1968. But after the death of Franco in 1975, when Spain started to transition to democracy, recognizing Israel was a problem, and it did not happen. Relations between Israel and Spain did not happen until 1986. Now, at the very beginning of this lecture, I talked about those signs saying Sepharad. Actually, the Caminos de Sepharad, or the red, which means network, Juderías de España, is an association of municipalities, and this is not a Jewish organization. It celebrates and preserves the cultural and historic inheritance of Spanish Jewish communities. So you see those Sepharad signs and the highs all over. And right now in Madrid, they are building a new museum, very important museum, almost 30,000 square feet, to teach future generations that Judaism is an intrinsic element to Spanish and Hispanic identity. So Spain's atonement in 1214, they basically offered Spanish citizenship to Jews who could prove that their family had been expelled. It could be joint citizenship. They did not have to move there. So you could be a citizen of Argentina and be a citizen of Spain at the same time. The law actually lapsed in 2019, but the law led people to discover their identities. Application was costly. The program was seen by some as an effort to boost declining Spanish population and economy, but what it did do is it did attract Jews to Spain, and it called attention to the history. And here you see Jews worshiping in the oldest synagogue in Europe. Currently, there's about 50,000 Spanish Jews. Largest concentration is in Barcelona. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Irene Kalpe is a rabbinical student who will be ordained in Potsdam, which is right outside of Berlin. And she right now is a student, and she's going to be ordained as a conservative rabbi this October. So I asked Irene, what is the Spanish Jewish community like today?
Thank you, Elena. I really like your question because right now in Spain, what we're living through is in the Jewish world is a crucial moment. You might say that it's a moment of crisis, which entitles some sort of change, and also a very challenging moment. And that is not always negative, but rather a very positive turn of events. Why do I say so? Well, first of all, it's been a long time since we've had a huge amount of Jews living in Spain, which is not really true because we don't compared to the Golden Age, compared to the Middle Ages before the expulsion, we had a great population, at least compared to the population which was not Jewish. But we have seen these last decades a new amount of people coming and immigrating, Jewish people migrating to Spain. And that has created that we have now more communities than we've ever had before. To put you an example, the first community after the expulsion in 1492 was set in Spain in 1917, and it was in Madrid, if I'm not wrong. And there was the other one was in 1918 in Barcelona. I mean, there's always a confusion of dates because, this competition between the two cities. It's just a joke, but it's true. We had one in 1917 and one in 1918 or 1917 consecutively. And this was the first community, and it remained the only one in Spain, the one in Madrid, the one in Barcelona. They were the only communities we had at the beginning of the 20th century. And it took a long time to get more than one community in one city. And this is what's been going on in this last decade. Now, right now, to put you an example, we've got in Barcelona, we've got two Orthodox communities, non-egalitarian, of course, plus Chabad Lubavitch, plus one Reform community, Reform liberal community, a Masorti community, which is the community I am doing my internship in. That's a TIT. And plus we have a series of minyanim throughout Barcelona. Now in Madrid, I know they have also Chabad Lubavitch. They also have the Orthodox community, plus a Reform liberal community, plus a Masorti community. And I don't know about the minyanim because I'm not living in Madrid, but I'm sure there are also minyanim there. And we have now as well in the north of Spain, we have two communities at least in the north of Spain, which was unthinked of. I mean, you could never think that could happen in the 21st century, and it's happening. We also have at least two communities in Valencia, that's on the coast, south coast. We also have several communities in Andalusia. Besides that, 5 years ago, the first Spanish-born, Andalusian-born rabbi was ordained. That's Rabbi Chaim Casas, who's a very close friend of mine. He was ordained at Leo Baeck College in London. And there was a huge turning point in the history and the contemporary history of the Jews in Spain. Because it opened the doors for many people, for many Jews in Spain, to think that they could also become rabbis. They could also become leaders, spiritual leaders in Spain. And that it was not necessary to come from Latin America or from Israel to be a leader. You could be born in Spain and become a leader. The doors were open. I mean, sometimes you just need like a spark like that to trigger. And that's what Chaim Casas did. For the future, together with Chaim Casas and other rabbis who are, I know they're studying now to become a rabbi, even if it's an online. We want to build a stronger Jewish community in Spain. That said, we also have. It's important to understand the people who are in the communities, to understand where they come from, right? Because why all of a sudden we have so many Jews in Spain compared to before, compared to like 20 years ago. Well, on the one hand, we have many people, which is very funny. They came from, these people have an Ashkenazi background because even though they come from Latin America, they are the children, the grandchildren of those who migrated from the Ashkenazi Europe to Latin America in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. Now, their children and grandchildren are coming to Spain. That started in the 1970s with the dictatorship in Argentina and Chile. Many of them immigrated to Spain and they settled in Spain. They had the children there. Now, many of them founded communities, among others, their community, Masorti community I'm a member in, and especially the Argentinian community. Now their children are members of our community and they were born in Spain, which is, it's funny how what's going on. And they speak Spanish and you tend to think that they might be Sephardi, but they're not. They are of Ashkenazi tradition. That's another challenge that we can talk about at another time. Also, we have many Israelis who are coming to, at least in Barcelona, to live in Barcelona. Why? Because many come from the area, the coast area, especially Tel Aviv, and they come to Spain, they come to the coast as well. They tend to migrate to the same area. So we have many in Barcelona, for example. The thing is that from the perspective of a member of a community and a future leader in a religious community, they don't tend to go to the synagogue too much, as most Israelis do. But again, the moment they want their children to have Jewish education and to do the B'nai Mitzvah or to learn the Jewish ways or the high holidays, they all come to the congregation. So that's another factor. So we have the people from Latin America plus the children and grandchildren plus people from Israel. And also we have more and more American people from the United States coming to live in Spain. And that means that we also have a huge amount of people who have lived their Jewishness in a very open-minded cultural background, something that we didn't have in Spain until very recently, and we're still fighting to have, because there's a lot of anti-Semitism in Spain. Although we might seem that we live very comfortably there, we still have, for us, it's normal to have security in front of the synagogues and to be interrogated before getting into a synagogue or searched. Unfortunately, that's something that I think I've come across in several places of Europe. So we have this interesting mix in Spain growing. And that's the challenge we have now. We have the challenge to try to put all this together. Plus, a huge amount of people who are becoming Jews by choice, either because they were born in a Jewish environment, but they never learned the Jewish ways, and now they want to return to it, or because they convert to Judaism and they freely choose to become Jews. And that's a very interesting mix, because they are there with the Israelis who don't really care about religion, at least apparently so. And then you've got all this amount of people who are returning or converting. They're really into religion and liturgy. And then you've got the more cultural environment from Latin America and the United States. So all that melting pot, if I may use that word, that we have now in Spain, is one of the crucial challenges and what makes it exciting in these days. Thank you.
So thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and end my program.